It's been about a year now since the Newcastle United owners were presented by architects with some plans for a proposed new stadium to be built here in Leazes Park, directly behind St James's Park. So why the delay? Why the dithering? Why they're not making a decision on this stadium? We've seen some of the media diagrams. The demand is there to fill a brand new, massive, world-class stadium, and the land is here. So why not just get on with it already? Well, in this video, I'm going to talk about the real reason as to why Newcastle United are not making a decision just yet. It's coming up. Welcome back, it's Eddie here from Tyneside Life. If you've been following my channel, you know I'm quite passionate about this stadium topic. I released a few videos about it about 18 months or so ago, and I've been delaying making this particular video because I wanted to see how this story unfolded. And of course, yesterday there was a fan event at Stack with some of the Newcastle United representatives, and the CEO, David Hopkinson, was asked by the fans, what's the update and decision about a stadium for Newcastle United? And basically the answer he gave was, I don't know. We haven't made a decision on it. This is after a year. But he did talk about the direction of travel of the club, that they want to make Newcastle United comparable with Real Madrid and Barcelona, one of the biggest clubs in the world, and to have world-class facilities. So now I feel like I'm in a much better position to make this video and talk about the things that I do know that are hindering Newcastle United making a decision on this. Now, you should know from the outset, first of all, I'm not in the know. I don't want to come across like that, but I do know lots about this topic. I do want to talk about matters that aren't being talked about amongst Newcastle United fans, which really are important. And there's a few elements to it, a few component parts. All of it is really important to understand the full context of this picture. And I would really encourage you to watch this from start to finish so that you are in a much better informed position to talk about it going forward. And in amongst all that, I'm going to talk about a piece of information that you might not be aware of that is absolutely crucial to what's going on with this decision making and why the delay. So first of all, one of the really important elements to talk about is Leazes Park. Leazes Park sits directly behind St James's Park and is Newcastle's oldest public park, officially opening in 1873. The land itself has a far longer story. It formed part of the Townmoor estate, historically controlled by the Freemen of Newcastle, who safeguarded these open spaces for public use for centuries. Their involvement was central to the park's creation during the Industrial Revolution, after residents successfully petitioned for a formal recreational space. Today, Leazes Park is Grade 2 listed and is further protected as an area of special historical interest within Leazes Conservation Area, a designation since 1974 that reflects the historic value of its Victorian layout, from the lake and bandstand to the tree-lined terraces and ornamental features. Although previously overseen by Urban Green, management has now reverted to Newcastle City Council following the charity's financial difficulties, returning responsibility for the park directly to the local authority. Leazes Park is not only home to a rich biodiversity, including around 1,000 trees, it's used daily for sport, fishing, walking, relaxation and family leisure time. And across the year it hosts fairs, community events, charity runs, festivals and occasional concerts. Despite recent difficulties, its repeated Green Flag Awards underline its long-standing reputation as one of the city's best maintained green spaces. For Newcastle, this park is more than just an expendable backdrop. It's a protected civic asset, a product of public demand, a symbol of the city's heritage, and a reminder that access to green space has always been a part of the city's identity and an environmental necessity. Leazes Park remains one of the most important pieces of land in the heart of Newcastle. I hope most of you now can see, even at this stage, how complicated this is by considering building a stadium on a Grade 2 listed park, Newcastle's oldest park, sitting in a conservation area with 1,000 trees, with all the biodiversity and the habitat and all the facilities that's going on. Because whatever is taken away from Leazes Park either has to be moved somewhere else or completely replaced. I'm going to talk a lot more about that in detail further on in the video. So when club officials talk about a world-class stadium, when fans talk about a world-class stadium, and when I talk about a world-class stadium and facilities, this is what world-class looks like. And this happened to me when I went on the Newcastle United summer tour 2 summers ago in America, and as part of that we ended up in Atlanta, and we played in the Mercedes-Benz Stadium there in Atlanta. And wow, that is what world class looks like. And that turned my head, that took my imagination out of the box, the small box I was already in relation to stadium facilities. Because going into a stadium like that isn't just about like going into St James's Park and going in a concourse, which are a bit like large prison alleyways where you cram together to get a pint and a pie. World-class facilities are turning up 2 hours before kick-off, going into the stadium and wandering around like you're in a high-end shopping centre, a never-ending food court with bars and places where you can buy merchandise. Just a pleasure to be in. Big, light, modern. That's what world class looks like and feels like. And that's what Newcastle United owners, I'm sure, are aiming for when they're thinking about building a new stadium. So you can start to get an idea that now the stadium needs to be much wider as well and longer to accommodate a much bigger concourse area. Now Atlanta Stadium, that was 3, I think even 4 stories of these facilities. It was absolutely mind-blowing, and we should be aiming for something like that. How big is world class? Well, to put into context, Leazes Park, give or take a little bit, in its entirety is about 43 acres. The Mercedes-Benz Stadium and its surrounding perimeter area, congregation areas, is about 50 acres. So now you're starting to get an idea of the scale. I would also bring your attention to the Etihad Stadium for Man City. Now that's a better stadium than St James's Park, of course, but I wouldn't, in terms of the facilities, I wouldn't class that as world class. But it's a 62,000 seater stadium, and the stadium footprint plus the land around it where fans walk around and congregate and the security perimeter is 42 acres. So if you were to lift up the whole of the Etihad Stadium environment and plonk it here, it would basically take up the whole of Leazes Park. There's also been an announcement by Birmingham City Football Club, who have announced plans for a 62,000 seater stadium. And the footprint of that stadium, and it looks magnificent in my opinion, plus the surrounding infrastructure that they're planning to use for fan congregation and facilities, etc., is 48 acres, 5 acres bigger than Leazes Park in its entirety. Then we get to Man United, who in March this year announced their plans for a 90,000 seater brand new stadium, and they're looking at land that's going to be used for a stadium and the infrastructure and facilities of up to 100 acres, more or less double the size of Leazes Park. It would take Leazes Park and the area of Castle Leazes just beyond the tree line there. So now you're starting to get an appreciation of the scale of what world class looks like and how big world class is. So I'm hoping that most of you are now at least catching on and have already started to figure things out, because when you see some of these images, the concept art, the stadium diagrams which are sitting on one half of Leazes Park, they're completely inaccurate. They are completely out of scale. When you look at them and revisit them, you'll see that the diagrams that you're looking at are roughly the same size as St James's Park. So I'm going to show you a diagram now of what a realistic size stadium would look like. a 60, let's call it a 65,000 seater stadium. That's going to be much bigger than St James's Park because you've got all those wider concourses. It's the ovals in green, which would be the stadium footprint, just an approximation, and the red oval around it is the fan infrastructure, the congregation areas, the security perimeter, the area which is probably be around about 30 metres where fans can walk around the circumference of the stadium. Now you can see that even if you try and scrunch it up further to the left of Leazes Park, it's going to be sat right on the edge, if not on top of the lake here. And I've put the yellow box on there, which is approximately 48 acres, which is the land that's going to be occupied by Birmingham City's new stadium complex. I'm hoping you can see that the notion or the idea that Newcastle United are going to try and build a world-class stadium facility and bunch it up onto one half of Leazes Park by trying not to compromise the lake. In my opinion, I'm sorry, I think you're having a laugh. I just think it's absolutely impossible. But even if you could, two things are going to happen. You're going to compromise the rest of the park because you're going to be trying to keep as far away from the lake as you can, but you're also going to compromise the size and the quality of the stadium, and nobody wants that. So I'm hoping that at least most of you are with me so far and are in agreement that trying to bunch a new world-class stadium onto one half of a park so as not to compromise the other half is, in my opinion, just making the best of a bad job. That's not world-class. Now, if they're going to compromise the park, then they might as well compromise the park and have a new stadium, and we're talking about at least 70, possibly 75,000 seater, which is going to be huge with the infrastructure around it. And that doesn't even include all the transport infrastructure that's needed to get in and around and access to the stadium from different directions. So, if you're going to compromise the park, have the stadium broadside in the middle of Leazes Park. Then you've got all the room to do exactly what you want with it. And in time, when St James's Park is demolished and brought down, that area could, for example, be used to move the Victorian terrace, which I was on before, put that where St James's Park now is, to have it some sort of lead up to the grand front broadside entrance to the stadium with the statues, maybe a fountain, some lovely hedgerows, and it'll look absolutely fantastic. So can you see that vision now, how it could look? Unfortunately, there's a massive but. Yes, a but, and quite a stinger, possibly an absolute deal breaker, and it's called biodiversity net gain. It was part of the Environmental Act 2021. It come into effect, I think, 2024, where it's now by law incumbent on developers to replace the lost biodiversity of an area that they've taken up. And of course, not only is this a historic grade 2 listed park, but it's in a conservation area. So there's about 1,000 trees. You've got all the habitat and biodiversity, the birds that come here and nest here, and the squirrels and the hedgehogs and the butterflies and the fish in the lake and the hedgerows, everything. And clever individuals will have to calculate what the biodiversity value is of this huge 43-acre conservation area park. And then whatever's lost, they have to replace it. So on the biodiversity spreadsheet, they have to show a 10% gain. So they have to replace everything that's lost plus 10%. That is an absolutely enormous task. Now, just to clarify, we haven't even started talking about the crucial piece of information that nobody's talking about yet. But before we do that, we need to start talking about the other significant problem, and that is the pushback. We already saw a few months ago, led by a local councillor called Rachel Locke, who instigated a petition against a proposed stadium on Leazes Park, and it had about 28,000 signatures. And that's before any plans were revealed by the club. So if and when Newcastle United do actually put plans together to build on Leazes Park, you can be rest assured that there will be one hefty petition and pushback against building on a Grade 2 listed park in a conservation area. That could get expensive and it could get messy. But also I want to talk about Marion Williams. I interviewed Marion a couple of years ago. She is a very important figure in this story as well, because in 1997, when Sir John Hall proposed plans to build a stadium which was 2/3 in Castle Leazes and about 1/3 coming up to the front of the lake here, Marion Williams and others who were part of the Friends of Leazes Conservation Group started a petition, and they got 36,000 signatures, to the extent that Sir John Hall binned the idea altogether. Now, Marion Williams, if you don't know her, she's obviously still around. She's a season ticket holder at Newcastle United. She's also a resident of Leazes Terrace, the Grade 1 listed terrace directly behind the East Stand. She's also a councillor, an independent councillor in Blakelaw. She also sits on the Newcastle City Council Planning Committee, and on top of that, she is now the Deputy Chair of the Newcastle United Fan Advisory Board. So how does all this sit with Marion Williams? We can legitimately ask, is she, if they were to propose a stadium on here, is she compromised? If they do propose it, is she as part of, because she's still a trustee with the Friends of Leazes Conservation Group, will they push back? Will she lead that pushback against that? So she'll know all sorts of things in relation to potential development, but will she get involved in pushing back? And if she doesn't push back, why not? Now for the juicy bit, and I suspect many of you Newcastle United fans watching this are going to wince, because ironically the Labour government could be the key to unlocking the problem to help Newcastle United to build a stadium on Leazes Park. How do we know that? Well, we know that Newcastle United have approached and had a conversation with the North East Labour Mayor, Kim McGuinness. How do we know that? Because Kim McGuinness has had a conversation with the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Lisa Nandy. How do we know that? Because in April just gone, Lisa Nandy did an interview on the TV, and this is what she said.
Yeah, I've spoken to Kim McGuinness, the Mayor, who is obviously very, very keen to make sure that the North East gets its fair share of funding to help with regeneration, to create jobs, to create growth, and we're really keen to support her in that ambition. In relation to the Newcastle project in particular, we take the same approach as we took to the Old Trafford regeneration. We're keen to support, we want to see it go ahead. Obviously, it will depend on the club and on the amount of investment that they can attract.
That's right. The Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Lisa Nandy, has already promised Man United money for regeneration and infrastructure development ready for their new stadium that Man United will pay for. And having had Newcastle United approach Kim McGuinness, who's then had the conversation with Lisa Nandy, and Lisa Nandy now is on record to say as long as Newcastle United put forward proposals and plans that show a significant economic benefit to Newcastle, then we, the Labour government, will help with the regeneration and development of the land. That could also include the huge problem of replacing the lost biodiversity. I don't know. So now we know, through this crucial piece of information which was released in April, that Newcastle United are clearly not in a position to make any decision yet, because as you can see by everything I've unfolded in this video, to propose to build a stadium on Leazes Park is monumental. It is so complicated from all sorts of different angles. But now we have central government involved who may be able to pave the way with extra money, and you're probably talking tens of millions to help with the infrastructure. From that, we can also glean that we now know that Newcastle City Council haven't been officially approached by the club. I mean, of course, there'll be conversations, but nothing where there's an audit trail. There's certainly been no plan submitted to Newcastle City Council, so they're not lying. I myself sent a Freedom of Information request in a few months ago, very precisely worded. They replied to me that there's been no contact with the club in relation to plans for a stadium here. I know Rachel Locke, the councillor who did the petition, she's done the same. There's probably one or two more. And the council, in a media article a couple of weeks ago, said there's been about 30,000 emails sent to the council. They're on record as saying that there's been no approach by the club to Newcastle City Council. And because we know that the club have bypassed the council, went straight to Kim McGuinness, the mayor, who then went straight to central government, to Lisa Nandy, that at the moment, Newcastle City Council, and by virtue of that, the Freemen of Newcastle, at this moment, aren't involved. To clarify, if you're a little bit lost in the weeds, March this year, Man United outlined their proposal for a brand new stadium, with Labour government on board to provide funding for the land redevelopment and restructure. We know Newcastle United have had a conversation with Kim McGuinness as a fact. We know Kim McGuinness has had a conversation with Lisa Nandy, because in the April, Lisa Nandy talked about Newcastle United and an agreement in principle that the government would help with money for redevelopment and land restructuring, on the understanding that Newcastle United did their bit and then put their planning proposal in to central government. If you're asking my opinion on this situation, when you appreciate the size of the land that's actually needed for a world-class stadium that's about 75,000 seater, with all the infrastructure around it, you're going to take up most, if not all, of Leazes Park. And now, bearing in mind all the biodiversity loss, basically Leazes Park has to be built or replaced somewhere else. I don't know where that's going to be, because it's certainly not going to be fulfilled by the footprint left by St James's Park, because that's about a quarter of the size. So that in itself is monumental, plus all the conservation pushback with petitions and the like. It just seems insurmountable that this is an unprecedented set of circumstances to consider building a stadium on a Grade 2 listed park in a conservation area. And to me, my personal opinion is, as part of that delay in making a decision, I think the gravity and the realisation of the club, when they're really starting to look into it, it just seems too unlikely for me. For fans out there who maybe is hankering on about building a stadium outside the city centre, I'll draw your attention to the new FA football governance regulations, which have only just recently come out, that puts fans at the heart of club decision making. There has to be a consultation process when clubs are starting to look at heritage assets like club home colours, like the crest, but also stadium relocation. So they have to get the majority of fans on board. Newcastle United have already done it with the stadium survey, which they did the back end of 2024. They've just done a huge consultation process just to change the club badge. So you absolutely know as a fact that if they were to consider building outside the city centre, they would need majority fan approval through some sort of survey. And I don't know what the majority of fans would think about that, but it seems to me that that would be highly unlikely. Look, I don't know what the club are going to do, and I genuinely believe the CEO, David Hopkinson, when he said yesterday at the fan event that he and the club don't know what to do. This is so complex. The idea of sticking an extension on top of the Gallowgate, which might give you, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 seats, even if you could, that's not world class. I mean, 6,000 or 7,000 seats, you can work out the maths yourself. That wouldn't even cover Bruno's wages. It's neither here nor there. That's not world class. You've still got an outdated stadium with shit facilities. The other option is, of course, is to knock the whole thing down, play somewhere else for a couple of years, like Barcelona have been doing, maybe Murrayfield at Edinburgh, or the Riverside Stadium at Middlesbrough, for example. But of course that has its complications, and you might be restricted on the size of the stadium you can then build in that footprint. That's why this situation is so complicated. It's been a really difficult video to put together. Try to remember all these important aspects and elements to this story so that you understand the full context of what's going on. But I hope you've appreciated it. I hope you found it informative, and please, if you did find some value from this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button, and thank you for watching.